Mayor Peter Waterman is a UBC graduate with a Bachelor of Science and Agriculture. He moved to Summerland from Kelowna in 1978. He worked with the Ministry of Agriculture for 21 years and in 2000 started his own apple and cherry orchard. He served 2 terms on council from 2005 to 2008 and again in 2011 through 2014. He lost a mayor's race to incumbent Janice Perino in 2008. In 2014, he was elected mayor in a close 5-way race.
Welcome to our Shaw TV studios at Prospera Place in Kelowna for your chance to ask the mayor in our series of chats with Okanagan mayors throughout the valley. And joining us today is Summerland Mayor Peter Waterman. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Let's start with some personal questions about sort of why you got into being a mayor. We know you were a 2-term councillor first, but maybe, I guess, your decision to shift gears.
Well, I actually essentially retired. I retired from being an orchardist and a consultant. Prior to that, I was an extension horticulturist with the Ministry of Agriculture. So my wife was busy retiring from teaching, so I thought that was it. I was going to leave the business. Yep. And it happened. I blew out the orchard lines, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, the election took place. And lo and behold, I came third out of about 15 councillor applicants, so to speak, contestants, and there I was.
What do you think? What do you attribute your popularity? Do you think to?
Well, I don't know. I think being known in the community is a big help, and the sort of thing we're doing right now. For example, I did radio broadcasts for years down south, and I had newspaper columns. My wife's been heavily involved in the community on the PAC, for example. She runs exercise classes. My kids have been heavily involved in things like triathlons and et cetera. So I guess the name was out there more than I thought, because I kind of got surprised. I thought, wow, oh, okay, I guess I'm on.
And rich history in agriculture. You worked for the ministry for a number of years. You had your own orchard. Do you think that resonates with people in Summerland?
I think, the issues in this valley are water and land. And I grew up in an orchard on the west side, and I took agriculture at UBC, and then after that I worked in private industry for a few years. Then I took an extension position with the Ministry of Agriculture in Penticton. We worked out of the research station and out of Penticton, and I guess I found that even before I left work, so to speak, or retired, I was involved in a water committee for the municipality. And that kind of got me going a bit there, and I didn't like the way things were going. So I thought, okay, well, I'll run for council, and I was sort of surprised I got in. But when I think back on it, maybe it shouldn't have been as much of a surprise, but, there I was. So it was a 3-year term at that time. And I guess after the 3 years, the headiness of it went to my head, and I thought, well, I'll run for mayor. Yeah. So I ran for mayor and paid the penalty of not winning. Yeah. So, for 3 years I was sort of paying attention to things, and I was on the library committee, for example, and then I ran again in 2011, got on as a councillor, and then after that period ran for mayor again. And it wasn't a runaway. No. There were 5 people running for mayor, which is quite extraordinary in a small town. Yeah. So, a couple of candidates, actually, we were occupying the same patch philosophically, and I won by 77 votes. Yeah, it was close. But I look at it, a win's a win. That's right. So there you go.
And you mentioned land issues and water and that kind of thing. Do you think that was the key?
Well, for that particular election, when I ran for mayor, yes. The previous council was really a development council almost at all costs, and the population didn't like it. We had some very large public meetings, tremendous, and I actually was amazed at the passion and the expertise that was exhibited by those who spoke at some of those meetings. And I learned very quickly, and it's kind of humbling, because you realize that when people can get up and speak like that, any one of those people could be sitting in your chair. So it was just a matter of what you choose to do.
Yeah.
And given the issue, and I was the only one opposed to what that particular council was doing, and I felt very comfortable, with the response generally of the population to that issue. And in fact, two of our, or at least one of our councillors, Aaron Carlson, was the de facto sort of leader of the quote rebellion for that, making the ALR land stay put. And so I certainly encouraged her to run, and I knew she wouldn't have any problems. So, that, and I think that's what did it. It was a wave. But at the same time, the whole council represents a shift, and not away from development particularly, but development that suits the town, not on agricultural land, on other land.
That's a big thing for you, right?
Well,
Keep
it is.
The ALR
I think,
land as is.
if you can get sort of philosophical in a broad way, saying, well, we think we're going to get our food from California. I hate to tell you, but they're losing land at a lot faster pace than we are, and climate change will impact, et cetera. Transportation costs can go through the roof. So at some point, it may get extremely expensive to bring in fruit and vegetables from somewhere else. So you try and keep the land you can. And in Summerland, we've got a balanced climate close to the lake. We can grow anything there. Soft fruits, apples, vegetables, you name it, specialty crops. So we're well positioned to be able to do things like that. And I see tremendous growth potential in niche agriculture products and so on.
Yeah. And often that land that the developers are looking at is often the prime real estate is in fact, it's where the ALR land sits, right?
Well, it's always been the case. I mean, I grew up in Kelowna. I know what's happened here over the years. And flat land is cheaper to develop. So it also is, in many cases, the best agricultural land. So it's been a bit of a battle since the ALR came into being in '73. So, we have to maintain enough to be able to look after ourselves.
Let's talk about maybe your greatest challenge so far in your term, and then maybe what you maybe see as the greatest challenge for the rest of this year.
Well, I think, 2015, we started running into the issue of school closure, for example. And unfortunately, we were in a position as a elected body that it's very difficult to either chastise or go after another elected body. They are elected to do their job, but we supported the people that were, trying to prevent school closures. And I think we saw that as a very broad issue, because Summerland has had since the recession came in 2008, 2007, our growth has been pretty modest. But as soon as we got in 2014, within a few weeks of getting in, we pulled back the application to remove the ALR land from the ALR, that agricultural land from the ALR. We pulled that application back, and within 3 months, we had established the new urban growth area and made changes to our OCP. And the rationale there was to encourage development in those areas. They knew where services would go, and they could develop with confidence. They could buy land with confidence that that's where things were going.
And have you seen that? Have you seen?
Yeah, it's happening now.
Yeah.
And for the previous 6 years, the two previous councils had been, as far as I was concerned, not focused. They thought they were going to be able to get this area of land out, and it just didn't work. So, and this did, our situation did. So the challenge is to, if you're going to look at school closures, how do you maintain growth? What family wants to move to a town with no elementary school, or one that's so incredibly full there's no room? So it was critical for us to maintain our schools, and I think, I see what the Premier did, for example, and the words she used, they were, pretty heartwarming in that she basically came right out and said, small towns, their economy depends on schools being there. And as far as I'm concerned, governing bodies like school district, municipalities, they should be working together in concert to maintain a strong economy, not be isolated for their own purposes. Because it's very critical what the school district does in terms of our strength.
And we see a lot of that in Soyuz going with the high school, the issues they've
Well,
had there,
the
right?
same issue. Sue McCordoff, really took a stand on that, and I know Sue quite well, and they really had to fight for that, and I'm glad we all did.
Yeah.
And the kudos go to the parents, because they just stuck it out, and they did a heck of a job. So that in 215 was probably the biggest issue, but it bridged into 216, of course.
Yeah. Is that still a challenge for you? Do you see
Well,
something else?
I think it's something that we're going to have to maintain pressure on. But when you've made the moves to provide room for growth, and we've seen, for example, in Trout Creek, there are 72 or 75 lots ready for housing. They're all serviced, ready to go. They are being built on now. There's another 75 that will come on stream in the next 3 to 5 years. And in the upper part of town, there's a potential for hundreds of new lots. So that, and downtown, for example, we haven't moved ahead with Wharton Street. That was a big development where there was going to be several hundred units, perhaps as many as 1,000 people. And that starts to make your downtown hum. So I'm looking forward to something happening there as well. And now there's a seniors complex that's looking at moving to Summerland. There'll be over 300 units there. They have to go through the process, so we don't know one way or another to what extent they'll be there, but they're started in the process. Okay. So things are happening, and I think people recognize that there's a lifestyle. I'd like to call us the lifestyle capital of Canada. Yeah. Because big box stores, for example, don't really think Summerland's the place to be.
Do you want them there?
No, we don't.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got small businesses, some niche businesses starting up that provide color. We've just got a Sunday market going last year that's been quite successful. So things are happening, and there's an awful lot of people that move to Summerland that bring their business expertise and either are working out of Summerland on the net, or they're running businesses from Summerland that are actually in Alberta, for example, or at the coast.
Yeah. Okay, we'll talk about a little bit more on that, growth and development and that kind of thing, but we'll take a short break for now and be right back with Summerland Mayor Peter Waterman. Welcome back to Ask the Mayor, today with Summerland Mayor Peter Waterman. Now let's talk a little bit more about some of the issues. Here's one. In March, the district gave notice on new agricultural water rates for rates above 800 millimeters per serviceable acre, I guess. And let's talk about the why behind that, and sort of what do you think that means for orchardists?
Well, it's been quite an issue for a while. We had to deal with residential or domestic water and settle that out, and then we wanted to make sure we understood how we were going to deal with the agricultural situation. And as it happens, for our particular area in that part of the Okanagan, 800 millimeters or 31.5 inches per acre is the amount of water per acre to be used in a season that the climate demands. It's a science-based number that the Ministry of Agriculture has set on for our area. For the North Okanagan, for example, I think it's about 27 inches. And further south, it's a little higher.
More rain, for example, right?
Yeah, well, they do. And so that changes things up. And so we always have had 800 millimeters as the base. And so that was, in years past, the charge per acre was about $37 per acre. Mm-hmm. I guess it's moved up now another 15% with this change. So the base rate has gone up per acre. And that's basically to pay for infrastructure, the maintenance costs, and so on, whether people use the water or not. We've got to have that much money to run the system and operate it. So as soon as people go over that, then that's perceived as being more water than the crops require. It's basically based on the evapotranspiration that the plants, how much water they put into the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And so Under hot, dry conditions, of course, there's more water going through the system. And so that was the base number. And it's been kind of tricky. We've had meters in place to understand what people are using. The meters, some of them we've had some difficulty with, so we've had somebody working on making sure they're all operating properly. And then there's the difficulties around how many acres people are actually watering.
Right.
Now, if you happen to be watering more acreage than is on the roll, and you always have, and then we suddenly start looking at the 800 millimeters and charging for more than that, and if you're using more because you're actually irrigating more land than we know about, then it's going to look like you're way above the 800 millimeters.
Yeah.
So we've had somebody, a contractor, working for a couple of months now to check on those acreages, make sure everything is right, and because there's no desire on the district's part to sort of grab money. The idea is we want to be able to operate the system.
Are you getting resistance from orchardists?
No, not really. But when you see, all of a sudden, if they get a bill that's over and above, then they're wondering why. And of course, we want to find out why as well. Are there leaks in their system? Are they watering more land, or are they overwatering, et cetera? So we've had somebody operating, looking at their systems and looking at the area they're using and looking at the numbers that are coming in and working with the people to make sure that everything is equitable.
It would depend on the type of apples maybe they're growing or the soil.
Well, everything changes, but the plant demand itself is the 800 millimeters. How frequently you may have to water, or how much at each time. Like, for example, in my orchard, everything was under plastic. I planted trees into plastic. And so the amount of use was pretty minimal, and it was all drip.
Yeah.
So, I was well under the 800 millimeters.
Are you getting a lot of orchards going over there?
There is a lot of drip systems going in and micro sprinklers and so on. Because I was an extension agent, I used my orchard as a demo, and I had people coming from around the world, around the province, to see what I was doing. And so I did all my fertilizing through my system. Everything was on a clock, et cetera, et cetera. So, it was reasonably well refined in terms of demonstrating how
water is money, right? And that's part of the profits.
Well, it's not. Yes, it is in a manner of speaking, because if you put too much water on, you get too much growth. If you get too much growth, you get shade. You don't get the color on your fruit. Also, you may tend to swing the trees into a vegetative mode, so they're not actually producing as much fruit. So there's a balance that you try and maintain, and it's all around. I don't like to use, for example, with respect to agriculture, growing production material, in the word conservation means very little to me in that sense, because I call it best water management practices. So we don't want to affect the grower's ability to grow a high quality product. He's got to have the right amount of water for the product, for the climate he's in, and for the soil he's in.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the latest crime report from the RCMP. Vehicle thefts, mischief, and home B&Es are down. That's good. The good news. The bad news: business B&Es, drug possession, and roadside suspensions are up. What do you make of the numbers?
Well, when you're pretty low anyway, you can go from 1 to 2, and all of a sudden you've doubled your crime stats.
Yeah.
So we're sort of in that area. You have half a dozen or more, and then you have 3 more roadside suspensions, and it looks like a 30% increase.
Yeah.
So I think, generally speaking, we're pretty low, and we are seeing a little more activity, though, because the Coquihalla is very close. The new highway system allows for people to access any part of the Okanagan quite quickly and leave quickly. So I know I see quite a bit of our head of our RCMP unit, and there are things that they're staying on top of course. But as far as Summerland itself goes, we're pretty low in crime. And as I say, when you get a jump in numbers that goes from 6 to 10 or from 4 to 8, all of a sudden you've got this massive jump. But what does it mean? You have to
You're
look
satisfied it's a safe community?
Yeah, absolutely. Every community has things happen that they don't want to see happen, but we've had 2 recent deaths, for example, but nothing to do with crime. That was just somebody climbing Giant's Head free climbing and didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah.
And on the weekend, an ATV flipped over, and he shouldn't have been in the place he was, but
Yeah.
it's very unfortunate.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about docks on waterfront properties. This is an issue up and down the Okanagan. How do you sort of balance the homeowners that want to have, not people traipsing all over their docks, for example, to the public who want to have access to the beachfront?
Well, everybody has access to the water below the high water mark. So if there's a dock that crosses from private property onto the lake, then actually people are allowed to cross that dock below the high water mark.
Yeah.
And what we're bringing in is zoning that's in the water that controls the length of docks, the width, and buoys, where buoys are placed. For example, people have come along and park a houseboat somewhere, and we want to be able to control. We've got so many buoys per 100 feet or whatever it is. The province also legislates docks, but they're not as specific as we can be, and we want to be in control of the whole waterfront, whether it's residential, commercial, or otherwise.
Is it a case of the province not enforcing it? Do you feel like that's what's happening?
No, I don't think so. It's we've had complaints. Well, this is duplication for residential, but we're looking at the zoning through the whole waterfront for various uses, and we're just not leaving that one out.
Yeah.
When it comes down to.
Let's talk about the fall fair a little bit. I mean, this is something that we ran in Summerland for over 100 years. It's 2 years now that it hasn't happened. Would you like to see a return? Is there something that council could perhaps do to help get it back on?
Well, we do assist the organizations, but when you have a volunteer core group, as the fall fair has had, you get burnout.
Yeah.
And this happens with lots of organizations. And it's a bit of a shame. I used to judge the products in there as a horticulturalist. And so it's a shame. But things change, and it may come back. I would like to see it come back. But right now, not in its place necessarily, but we have what's called the Marginal Arts Festival starting in this September for 3 days. It's going to be a tremendous event. So we've got Campbell Riga coming back, it's basically built around Mr. Riga, and so his son is coming back with his quartet. We'll be playing, and there's all kinds of arts-related things going on, and this council's been very pro visual and performing arts and culture. We've just finished up a cultural plan, and I think it's something that's been neglected in Summerland for quite some time. So we'd like to foster that, and because the arts can be a strong economic driver as well.
And also new, I guess fairly new for Summerland, is the Ogo Pogo bathtub race. Are you happy with that? Would you like to see that continue?
It's growing, and I understand this year, I was away camping that weekend, unfortunately, but it brought in competitors from the coast, and these guys are pretty hot when it comes to bathtub competitions. But I'm wondering whether, that one goes to Penticton from Powell Beach, and it changed locations. This is a better location for it to start from. But I sort of was thinking, why not have a youth bathtub thing going from, say, Powell Beach to Crescent Beach? A shorter run there and back or something. So I think there's lots of room for growth, and as we get more festivals and, outfits like the bathtub race getting going, I think it's pretty cool.
All right, we'll talk about growth in a different sense after the break when we come back and talk a little bit about housing and employment in Summerland. And welcome back to Ask the Mayor with Summerland Mayor Peter Waterman. Let's talk a little bit about housing in the community. I just had a look at the numbers and crunched them a little bit. For the average house price is about $500,000 this year in Summerland, which is higher than Penticton. Is that something, I guess, for affordable housing? Do you guys have a plan for that?
It's difficult. I think what we've done is we've intensified things. We now have a zone that's RSD1I, which is small lots. And because Summerland grew up on septic fields, a lot of the lots are pretty reasonable size. We've now got sewer. So a lot of those lots can actually accept carriage houses, can be subdivided into the main lot and a small lot. So that's infilling. And I think that's a good thing in that you're using infrastructure that's already in place. And our sewer system, for example, is only at about 50% capacity. And we need more flow to make it work better, actually.
Right.
But yeah, I think...
so is that the way to affordable housing?
Well, that's part of it.
Lane
that's
houses?
part of it.
That's a plan?
There are also, I was looking at a new development in the last couple of weeks. I happened to walk in the morning by this. I started talking to the developer. And these are new houses that'll be topping out at $450, including the land.
Okay.
So those are spec homes, and spec homes haven't been built in Summerland for a while, mostly due to the recession. But now we've got people moving from Alberta and Vancouver, et cetera, with selling in the 1.2 to 2.2 range.
Right.
They come here looking at a $500,000 to $700,000 home. And
it's a bargain to them,
It's
right?
a bargain, and
Yeah.
so they pay that. They've got no debt, and they've got money left over.
Like a lot of Okanagan communities, Summerland is seen as a retirement community, perhaps more so than some of the other ones. And is that kind of what you see the community as, or is there a way to get more people, younger people, to come there?
Well, I think as you try and foster growth in one way or another, just as an example, we're putting in a new skate park, and that'll be up and running by this time next year, I'm sure. So I've had kids bugging me when I go get groceries and so on. Is that thing ready yet? You know, when's it going to be ready?
Right.
So, you know, if a family comes into town and kids see things like that, I think probably it's a bit of a push. When we moved there years ago, in the late 70s, Summerland was the only one in the south with an indoor recreation pool. Penticton had nothing.
Right.
They had an arena. So, and I used the pool in Kelowna every day. And so there was very little choice for me. I chose the town with the pool. So I think the same thing will happen with other families. They look at the amenities that are available, and they'll make their decision, especially if travel is maybe a component of it, but within the valley, it's pretty easy now with a new highway.
Yeah. And you mentioned walking around, you see these developments, and building permits are at a 5-year high now.
They've jumped up again, and our building department, development department is very, very busy. We've had to hire, well, we have one full-time, one permanent half-time, and another fill-in, and I can see us having to bump that up.
Is there a way you can, is there things you can do to attract the young people? You mentioned the skate park and that kind of thing, but jobs, for example. You don't really think of Summerland as a sort of heavy industry type work.
You know, we're seeing young professionals. A good example is a young man that I happen to know who moved from the coast. He's an engineer. He's 35. 2 little kids and a wife who's a teacher. And he walked into his boss's office down in Richmond and said, you know what, I'm going to quit. I'm moving back up to the Okanagan. And his boss said, don't quit. You can operate out of your home in the Okanagan, come and see us once a month, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, the computer systems that we have, high-speed internet, changes everything. And I see a lot of things come across my desk. For example, I had a fellow come from Southern California who happened to also have Canadian citizenship. And he was a web massager, okay?
All right.
Which means he comes to you and says, I can make your website perform better.
Yeah.
He had his contacts all across the United States.
He could do that anywhere.
It doesn't
I suppose, right?
matter where he is.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that, and we're seeing people moving from some areas, like the prairies, for example, and they want a better lifestyle that's got recreation opportunities, not as cold, and they'll move their top people into the Okanagan, and we've seen them move into Summerland, and they run their operations elsewhere from Summerland.
Yeah.
It's easy.
Thanks for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you in the studio, and best of luck in Summerland.